it's just like everything else. When everything's starting to click for you and your legs and your timing and everything's right, the ball seems to come off a little quicker and it does go a little further. I'm not a real good short wedge player, you know what I mean? But that comes in time, so there's no sense rushing to something like that.
Fuzzy Zoeller waving a white towel at the 1984 US Open sounds like a joke, but what actually happened was way more embarrassing than anyone remembers. The man literally surrendered to an opponent who had not even beaten him yet, and the worst part? He had no idea what was really going on. This is the story of how one golfer completely misread a situation, turned himself into a walking punchline, and somehow still won the championship. It is ridiculous. It is legendary. And it all started with a crowd that got way too excited about a putt that should not have mattered. Before we dive into 1984, we need to talk about November 2025. That is when Fuzzy Zoeller died at age 74. When the obituaries came out, every single one mentioned the white towel story. Not his wins, not his career. Just that towel. That tells you everything you need to know about how history remembers him. A guy who made one funny gesture and let it define his entire legacy. Now let us go back to June 1984, Winged Foot Golf Club in New York. This place is not just a golf course, it is a torture device designed to make professionals look like amateurs. The fairways are narrow, the rough is thick, the greens are evil. In 1974, they called the US Open at Winged Foot the Massacre because the winning score was 7 over par. 7 over par. That is how brutal this place is. The USGA sets up US Open courses to embarrass the best players in the world. Fairways are narrowed to 25 yards or less. The rough is grown so thick that missing the fairway costs you half a stroke. The greens have steep false fronts that reject anything not perfectly placed. Winged Foot rewards grim determination and punishes every mistake. By 1984, they toned it down slightly, but Winged Foot still wanted blood. The 18th hole is named Revelations, which is a biblical reference that should tell you how dramatic it gets. It is a par 4 that measures 448 yards. The tee shot has to thread through trees. The approach shot goes to a green that slopes like a ski hill, and they built massive grandstands around it. Those grandstands are important because they trapped sound. When the crowd roared, it echoed and bounced and got amplified. Keep that detail in mind. So who are the main characters in this comedy? First, you have Fuzzy Zoeller, born in Indiana, 32 years old in 1984. The guy was famous for whistling while he played. Whistling at a US Open. That is not normal. Most golfers at majors look like they are attending a funeral. Zoeller looked like he was at a backyard barbecue, but do not let the whistling fool you. Zoeller could close. He won the 1979 Masters in his very first try, which almost nobody does. He beat Tom Watson in a playoff. The man could handle pressure. His whole thing was treating golf like a game instead of life or death. He once said winning the Masters was as close to heaven as he would ever get. That mindset let him joke around when everyone else was falling apart. Then you have Greg Norman, the Australian, 29 years old, not yet the great white shark superstar he would become, but already incredibly talented. Norman hit the ball long and straight. He played aggressive. He was intense and focused. Where Zoeller was loose and chatty, Norman was on fire. He was hunting his first major championship, and 1984 was going to be the start of a very long, very painful pattern of almost winning. The tournament started on Thursday. Hale Irwin, the guy who won the 1974 Massacre, jumped out to the lead. It felt like history repeating. Zoeller stayed steady. He shot 71 the first day, then a brilliant 66 on Friday. That 66 put him just one shot behind Irwin. On Saturday, both Zoeller and Norman shot 69. Norman moved into third place, 2 shots behind Irwin and 1 behind Zoeller. Heading into Sunday, it was a 3-way race. Sunday at a US Open is where dreams die. Hale Irwin collapsed. He shot 79, just fell apart. That left Zoeller and Norman fighting for the title. Zoeller grabbed control early. He built a 3-shot lead on the front 9. But then the back 9 happened. Zoeller started making mistakes. Norman started clawing back. By the time they reached the final holes, they were tied at 4 under par. The tension was suffocating. One shot would decide everything. Here is where it gets good. Norman was playing in the group ahead of Zoeller. He reached the 18th hole tied for the lead. Needed a par to post 4 under par. A birdie would put him at 5 under and probably win the whole thing. His second shot was a 6-iron. Under all that pressure, he pushed it. The ball flew high and right, sailing directly into the grandstands. Now, in most situations, hitting your ball into the stands is a disaster. But the rules of golf say grandstands are temporary, immovable obstructions. Norman got a free drop. No penalty. His new position was terrible. He dropped into deep rough, far from the hole, and the green was sloping away from him. He had to chip onto a surface that did not want to hold the ball. Norman chipped aggressively. Too aggressively. The ball came out hot, rolled past the hole, and kept going. It finally stopped about 45 feet away. Now he was facing a putt that was nearly impossible. If he missed, he would drop to 3 under par, and Zoeller just needed a simple par to win. The pressure on that putt was enormous. Norman stalked the putt. He read it. He struck it. The ball rolled across the slopes and bumps of the Winged Foot green, held its line. It tracked, and it dropped into the cup. Gallery absolutely exploded. It was not a normal cheer. It was a roar. A primal, history-changing roar. Norman pumped his fist. He had saved par to post 4 under. Meanwhile, Fuzzy Zoeller was standing in the 18th fairway, about 180 yards away. He could see the crowd going crazy. He could not see what Norman had actually done. All he heard was the roar. And in golf, when a crowd roars like that, it usually means a birdie or an eagle. A pair save, even a great one, does not generate that kind of noise unless it wins the tournament. If you are enjoying this absolute mess of a story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me the funniest sports moment you have ever seen. I want to hear what made you laugh out loud. Now back to Zoeller. So Zoeller hears this roar and immediately thinks Norman just made birdie. He thinks Norman is now at 5 under par. Zoeller is at 4 under. To win, he would need to hole his approach shot for an eagle. To tie, he would need a birdie. Both options are nearly impossible from 180 yards out on a green like Winged Foot. Zoeller looked at his caddy and said, "My God, he just beat us." In that moment, Zoeller's brain convinced him the tournament was over. He did not consider any other possibility. He did not think maybe Norman made a great par save. Jumped straight to defeat. That is what makes this whole thing so ridiculous. A professional golfer with years of experience, who won the Masters, who knows how golf crowds work, immediately assumed the worst-case scenario. No patience, no waiting to confirm, just instant surrender mode. And this is where Zoeller's personality took over. Instead of getting angry or sad, he decided to be funny. He reached into his golf bag, pulled out a white towel, and started waving it above his head, the white flag, universal symbol of surrender. He was telling Norman and everyone watching, "You got me. That was too good. I give up." The commentators loved it. They called it a great tribute from one professional to another. It was self-deprecating. It was acknowledging the opponent's brilliance. Except for one tiny problem. Norman had not made birdie. He made par. Zoeller had surrendered to a man who had not even beaten him. As Zoeller walked toward the green, someone told him the actual score. An official or his caddy broke the news. Norman made par, not birdie. Par. Zoeller was still alive, was still tied. All he needed was a par to force a playoff. Imagine that mental whiplash. 1 second you think you lost, the next second you realize you were still in the fight. You just waved a white flag on national television for no reason. But here's the crazy part. Zoeller regrouped his approach shot. He two-putted for par. Just like that, the tournament was tied at 276, 4 under par. They would come back Monday for an 18-hole playoff. Zoeller had just emotionally surrendered, and he did. Monday was a different story. In 1984, U.S. Open playoffs were full 18-hole rounds, not a 2-hole sprint like today, a full round. The ultimate test of stamina and nerves. And the dynamic had completely shifted. Zoeller was the man who survived. Norman was the man who hit a miracle putt and still could not finish the job. Zoeller came out firing. He birdied the first hole, then he birdied the second hole. Norman, on the other hand, made a double bogey on the second hole. Within 30 minutes, the match was over. Zoeller had seized control and never let go. Zoeller shot a 67 under par at Winged Foot in a playoff. That is one of the greatest rounds in U.S. Open history. He did not just beat Norman, he crushed him. Norman struggled to a 75-5 over par. The final margin was 8 strokes. It was not even close. It was a massacre. The stats tell the whole story. Zoeller shot 34 on the front 9. Norman shot 38. Zoeller shot 33 on the back 9. Norman shot 37. Zoeller was loose and confident. Norman was tense and pressing. The white towel moment from Sunday seemed to carry over. Norman had fired his best shot and failed to put Zoeller away. That had to be haunting him. What makes this even more impressive is the equipment they were using. This was 1984. The golf ball was a balata ball with a liquid center. It spun like crazy but flew shorter distances. If you hit it wrong, the ball would curve 30 yards offline. Modern golf balls are way more forgiving. The drivers were made of persimmon wood or early metal, tiny sweet spots compared to today's massive titanium clubs. The irons were blade style with no forgiveness at all. One bad swing, and you were toast. The greens at Winged Foot were rolling at about 10 or 11 on the Stimpmeter. That sounds slower than today's 13 or 14, but the slopes at Winged Foot made them terrifying. A 40-foot putt like the one Norman made required perfect pace. Too firm and the ball rolls off the green. Too soft and it dies before the hole. Norman making that putt with 1984 equipment was genuinely incredible. Zoeller shooting 67 in the playoff with those same clubs was maybe even more incredible. These guys were playing a much harder version of golf than what we see today. Modern equipment has made the game easier in a lot of ways. Longer drives, more forgiving irons, balls that do not curve as much. When you watch videos of the 1984 U.S. Open, you are watching two men perform under extreme pressure with tools that punished every mistake. That context makes Zoeller's white towel moment even more ridiculous. He was playing the hardest version of golf at the hardest course in America during the hardest tournament, and he still found time to crack a joke. And then came the perfect ending. As the two men walked up the 18th fairway on Monday, Zoeller led by 8 shots. The tournament was over. Norman realized the hopelessness of his situation and decided to close the loop on the joke. He pulled a white towel from his own bag and waved it at Zoeller. The call back to Sunday, but this time it was real. Norman was actually surrendering. In the post-round interview, Norman showed incredible class. He said, "Hey, I give in, but with honor and with sportsmanship." He hugged Zoeller's caddy. He congratulated Zoeller before they even finished the hole. That moment is why the story is funny instead of cruel. Norman joined the joke. He made it a shared bond instead of a bitter memory. So why is this the funniest trash talk story ever? Because it was not even trash talk. Trash talk is when you claim you are better than your opponent. Zoeller did the opposite. He claimed his opponent was too good for him. He surrendered before the fight was over. And in doing so, he accidentally intimidated Norman. By saying "you beat me," Zoeller forced Norman to think, "Did I?" The psychology of it is fascinating. By turning the moment into a joke, Zoeller released all the pressure he was feeling. He accepted the loss before it happened. The relief gave him a boost of energy. He had been given a second life. Norman, meanwhile, had spent all his emotional energy saving pair, only to find himself back in a tie. The contrast in their mental states heading into Monday was stark. Here's the cherry on top. The actual white towel is gone, lost to history. Zoeller tossed it to a kid or spectator near the 18th green on Sunday. He later joked, "If you happen to see a grungy white towel hanging around, get it for me, will you?" One of the most famous artifacts in golf history, thrown into the crowd like a sweaty rag. That is peak Zoeller. The man never took anything too seriously. The 1984 U.S. Open became the peak of Zoeller's career. He was now a two-time major champion, 1979 Masters and the 1984 U.S. Open. The white towel became his signature moment. It captured his entire brand, the guy who could beat you while making you laugh. But that brand would eventually turn sour. In 1997, Zoeller made racially insensitive remarks about Tiger Woods at the Masters. The Joker persona that was celebrated in 1984 was suddenly reviled. The culture had shifted. His style of humor, which seemed harmless in the 80s, became a massive liability in the 90s. White towel represents the innocent era of Zoeller's career before everything went wrong. For Norman, 1984 was just the beginning. It was the first cut in what would become a career full of heartbreak. He played brilliantly. He hit a miracle putt. Weird things happened, and he lost. That pattern repeated over and over. In 1986, Bob Tway holed a bunker shot to beat him. In 1987, Larry Mize chipped in to beat him. In 1996, he blew a 6-shot lead to Nick Faldo at the Masters. The white towel story made Norman sympathetic to the public. But for Norman, the competitor, it was brutal. The interesting thing about Norman's response is how it shaped his reputation. By waving the towel back at Zoeller on Monday, he showed class. He showed humor. He showed sportsmanship. That mattered. In a sport where players are often cold and distant, Norman's willingness to laugh at himself made people like him. Even though he lost, even though it hurt, he refused to be bitter. That moment of grace probably helped him later when the losses piled up. People remembered him as the guy who could lose with dignity, the guy who understood it was just a game, even when it felt like everything. When Zoeller died in 2025, every obituary mentioned the white towel. Not his skill, not his other wins, just that towel. It outlived his controversies. It outlived his regrets. It became the thing people remembered. And honestly, that is kinda sad. A man's entire legacy reduced to one gesture he made because he misunderstood a crowd roar. But maybe that is exactly what makes the story so perfect. It is about the absurdity of sports, the randomness, the fact that you can do everything right and still lose, or do something completely wrong and still win. Zoeller waved the white flag because he thought he lost. In doing so, he relaxed enough to win. Norman hit a miracle putt to save a tie, but the emotional cost left him empty for Monday. The white towel was the pivot point, the moment where the tension of winged foot snapped and got replaced by the absurdity of being human. Zoeller admitted what every golfer feels when they play a U.S. Open. "This game is impossible. You are a magician for even being here." And then he went out the next day and performed his own magic, hitting a 67 to crush the magician. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me through this wild story. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss more sports moments like this. Seriously, drop a comment telling me your favorite trash talk or funny sports moment. I read every single one. This story proves that sometimes the funniest moments are not even planned. They just happen when the pressure gets too high and someone decides to laugh instead of cry. Fuzzy Zoeller laughed, and somehow that made him a champion.